Welcome, everyone. This is Colleen McCarthy O'Toole from CureSMA's Family Support Department. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would also like to thank our national presenting sponsors, Biogen, Genentech, and Novartis Gene Therapies, as well as our platinum sponsor, Scholar Rock, for their generous support of the Summit of Strength virtual webinar series. We appreciate all the questions that we've received in advance of this webinar, and we're going to try to answer many of these during today's presentation. You are also able to submit questions throughout this webinar using that chat box, which you will find located in your GoToWebinar toolbar. If you have any additional questions after today's presentation and Q&A, please contact the CureSMA Family Support Team at familysupport@curesma.org. We would now like to welcome our speaker, Marianne Ellert, founder of Projected Tomorrows Incorporated, who will be sharing her presentation, Bringing You Protected Tomorrows, Creating a Life Care Plan. Marianne?
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. So here we are, and we are going to share many topics today. So I'm going to try to take one topic at a time so it's not overwhelming, but let's get started. Next slide. So why do this? Sometimes people always ask me when I get started, and who am I and why am I even doing this? So my sister, Marcia, had cerebral palsy, and I grew up with her. So she was 4 years younger than me, and I've learned what I'm going to talk to you about from her. So she was my best teacher. She, when born, was not diagnosed right away, and said she had a twin who was typical. And so it took my parents several years to get a diagnosis. And when they did, it was interesting because my parents sat me down. I was 6, and my sister was 2. And they got the diagnosis, and they sat me down and said, okay, you're the biggest sister. I had 3 other siblings, and you are going to be the one who's going to take care of Marcia when she gets older. And I was 6. And I was just so excited about that because I had a younger sister. I was going to get to be responsible because I was one of those kids who loved it. So what does that mean? It meant to me at the time just fun. As I got older, I learned it was responsibility, and it required me, as I started to think about her life, to do a lot of advocating and planning. So that's kind of where my impetus came to do this. And after 20 years in the industry of finance, I decided to focus 100% on this. So here we are, and we're going to talk about what I thought about, what I've learned from her. So next slide. So our mission today is the same as I'm going to guess is your mission. If you are a parent or a person with a disability, our only mission is to make sure that you have a safe but fulfilling life. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Let's get started. Next slide. So the thing I do know is that this is complex. And planning for anyone is complex. When somebody starts to talk to us about wills and trusts and money and care planning and all the things we need to do to ourselves, it can be very complex. And so sometimes we don't start. So we're going to take this through a few steps today, and we're going to try to touch on all of these and some of the things that you need to do either for your family member or for yourself in planning for the future. Next step. And my only goal is to make sure that I help you take action. So I do know that because it's complex, we have sometimes we procrastinate, right? And our lives are overwhelming anyway, and especially these days with the things we're going through with the pandemic. And so my only goal today is to have you have some awareness of the things you might be doing or could be doing, and hope that at the end I'm going to ask you to make a commitment to yourself to take some action. Next slide. So how do we start? How do you even think about this? Because it is overwhelming. So I'm going to call this first step, take a candid look. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions. The first question is, what's the best thing that could happen? If it's for you, if it's for your child, if it's for a sibling, what is the best thing that can happen for their future? And just take a minute and jot that down for yourself, because I consider this the benchmark that we're going to use in planning going forward. And it is really important to recognize this. I know that someone told me many, many years ago when I was building businesses that I always needed to know what I wanted and what success looks like. And they also taught me that I needed to know what a failure would look like, right? And that's how we always build a plan. And we're going to build a care plan today. So I'm talking from the reference of creating one for my sister, or also creating one for my own son who also has a disability. And I always want to think about, wow, what's the best thing that can happen for his future? What do I want? And then secondly, the second question I'll ask you is, what's your biggest fear? Is it, it's about caring for this person. So I'm going to tell you my typical answers that I hear because we're not face-to-face online today where we can talk about it. But I will tell you the things I hear about the best thing that can happen. Many times revolve around happy, independent. Those are the two key things I hear. But I also hear they revolve around a safe place to live, an accessible house, a job, friends, enough money. Those are the things that revolve around. But the most common answers I hear are happy and independent. So I know that we're doing this for 30 years, that happy and independent are feelings and not very quantifiable unless you spend some time on it. So we're going to talk today about what it takes to get to happiness and what it takes to get to independent. And our fears, a lot of times the fears I hear people talk about are running out of money, as well as abuse, that the person might be abused by others or taken advantage of. So we'll kind of use those as framework, but it's important for you to write yours down as well. Next slide. So this step is all about creating that vision. So now we know what we want and we know what we don't want, right? So that's why I want you to really, as we're sitting here and you have a pencil and paper with you, if you could write some of those things down that you want and don't want, because that will relate to this next step, which is creating the future. Look at what the future is going to look like. Next slide. So I might talk about this from the parent's perspective or sibling's perspective. I know that if I'm a caregiver, I need to take care of myself, but my tendency is to take care of my son, right? As a parent, it's our tendency. And it's always to take care of others and not necessarily look inward at ourselves. But I also know that when I get on an airplane, not getting on many today, but when we do get on an airplane and the oxygen mask comes down, who should we put on first? Our own or the person staying next to us? And we should put on our own first, because we can't take care of that person next to us. If there's a child sitting next to us, we can't help them unless we're okay. So this is not going to be a financial planning class for you, but it's really important, because if you are going to be responsible to help someone else fund their future, you need to make sure yours is funded. You need to make sure that you have proper savings and you understand what your cash flow is and you understand what your retirement looks like, because in reality, you're retiring for free. If you have someone else you have to provide for, you have to provide for your spouse and yourself and another individual. Now, you may have other children, and those children might need funding up to a certain age, but we're kind of counting them to have careers and jobs. And we might be funding someone else and subsidizing them. They may have jobs. I'm just on the phone this morning with someone, and she has a disability and she's got a great job, but there's other situations where we have to make sure that her assets and income are limited in order to get some funding that she needs. Next slide. So let's assume you are going to take care of yourself. Now, once we know that you have done that, I'm going to focus on how do we make sure that if you are a person with a disability as a child or for yourself, that you have enough money to provide a safe and happy life for yourself. So we are going to look at what it takes to get there. And I used to always tell people, well, it's a lot of money. It's a big stack. But I think at this point, after doing this for so long, we have a pretty good sense of what it takes to figure that out, to figure out how do benefits play in and how much money do we need. Next slide. So when we look at this vision, the vision we start with is where is someone going to live? What are their medical needs going to be? What is their recreation and fun going to look like? What's their education? And education never stops. What's your education going to look like? You know, if they're going to work, what kind of subsidies do they need to make sure that they can work? And all of those things. And as we look at that and we build a care plan around that, and that's just like you and I providing our own cash flow. So sometimes I tell people to do this and they go, I don't get it. I don't get what I'm supposed to be doing here. So I'm going to relate it back to you, and maybe that'll help you think about how you think about someone else. If I'm working with someone who wants a retirement plan, I just don't pick a number. You know, I can't just pick a number. I have to know what their life's going to look like. And so what I want first is I want to know what their life looks like today. And if today means they're living a certain standard, they have certain medical needs where we have to have medical expenses related in that cash flow. People's recreation, sometimes people's recreation looks like bowling and other people's recreation looks like travel. And so different cost price points, okay? So the plan of how we think about our life helps me put the dollar to it. If I was talking to somebody about their retirement, I'd want to know how they live now. And then I want to know about their health, and I want to know about all the things they do for their life. And then I can project out into the future, and we could have conversation about what does that future look like. And so I can say, what are you living? What's it cost to live now? And what does it cost to live in the future? I can project that based upon their life. And I have people in all walks of life we do that with. And everybody's is different. Everybody's got a different view of what the world looks like. So now, if you're planning for a child with a special need, or planning for yourself, you have to kind of look at it and say, what does that look like? This drives the dollars. The vision drives the dollars. Then we can say, where's that money going to come from? Government benefits? Do we want to make sure we don't do anything that we don't get them? How much do we have to save for ourselves, or save other people going to save for us? What kind of insurance should we have, or could insurance fund the future for us if our parents left us an inheritance? Other family members, are we going to work? So mechanisms of funding the future come second. What it looks like first comes first, you know, with the vision. Next slide. So how do we start that? People always say, well, how do I start? Well, you start by creating the expense list. You say, what do my living expenses, what do they look like now? What do they cost? What does it cost to live? What are my medical needs? What's my recreation needs? What are all those things? And then we put on top of that, what's the income going to look like? What do I get now? What do I have coming in? And so if we're talking about planning for a child, I always say on the left side, you'll see all the different stages of life. And so if your child is 3, it's going to look different than if your child, and these are the stages typically we see in the world of disabilities. First, it looks different than if a person is 6 in school, they're in special ed perhaps, or if they're a transition stage of coming out of school and going into college programs, or going into work programs, or not being able to do that. And then we have adulthood. So adulthood is the stage at which someone is no longer, we hope, living with mom and dad, and they're becoming an adult, and they're maybe living independently with resources. And then thirdly, that last one is life without you. What's that? Excuse me. Life without you is the stage with you're not around as mom and dad, or if you are living with a person with a disability, you don't have other people to provide services to you. So how do we do that? How do we think about that stage? And as a parent, I'll give you an example. So my son has disabilities, but he's also, he has physical disabilities and intellectual disabilities and some mental illness. So he's impacted in many ways, but one of his disabilities is he's blind. And I'm his driver, right? And Uber's his driver. But while I'm around, I can do a lot of the driving. When I'm no longer around, I'm not here to do the driving. And in his budget, I have to increase that number. What is it for your family member or for you that has to be, a dollar amount has to be increased because someone in your life is doing it for you now? And is that going to be something that's taken up by the government dollars that can be picked up? Or is it something that you will have to make sure that you leave money behind? So that's kind of how we build this. We go through expenses, we identify them, And then we say what's coming in. Is it gonna all come from family? Are we gonna get Medicaid dollars? And are we gonna get SSI or some kind of disability dollars, which we're gonna talk about. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about government benefits, because it sometimes feels like it's talking about, when we're talking about the government, it's overwhelming, it's intimidating. I know if you are dealing with the IRS, you hire a CPA because no one wants to talk about the government. talk to the government about our money. And it's the same thing having to do with benefits. So I'm going to try to give you enough information so it's not overwhelming and you won't be intimidated. Next slide. So I'm going to go through this circle, and I'm going to go through these quickly, and they kind of feed into each other. So we'll be going pretty quick as I go through each slide. This circle has 4 quadrants in it. When I talk about the top 2, those are going to be benefits that we are entitled to, okay? So we paid into them. If we worked, we have money taken out of our paycheck, out of FICA. That's an entitlement, and therefore we're going to get something that we actually bought. Next slide. The bottom of the circle talks about benefits that we get because we need them. We didn't buy them. We're not entitled to them. So we have to qualify, okay? So I'm gonna make this simple about benefits because it's usually complex. 2 kinds, entitlements that we bought and needs-based, and therefore we have to jump through hoops to get those. Next slide. When I'm talking about something on the left, it'll be money. Next slide. And when I'm talking about benefits on the right, it's gonna pay for things like healthcare, programs, job coaching, residential support, accessible housing, things like that. Next slide. So now we have the framework of how things work, right? So I'm going to kind of give you like a little class here on how these benefits work. So if I become disabled and I've got entitlements, I've bought to this, I've worked, I have something called work credit that I have with the Social Security system, and I've paid into it. And for every time I work, I get some credits, and it builds up. So if I have enough and I become disabled, I would go to the government and say, I'd like my Social Security disability. That's what that SSDI. Notice it's on the top under entitlements. So it has an income rule, and the income rule says, if I can't make a certain amount, they will consider me disabled. Now, it's not because I can't get a job. It's not because there's a pandemic and I can't work. It's about I can't work because of my disability and make substantial gainful activity. That's what they call it. And right now it's $13.20 a month. It goes up, but right now it's $13.20 a month. So if I can prove I cannot make that, and how do I prove that? Medical records. I give them my medical records. I show them that I haven't made enough. I can't make enough to support myself, which is a substantial gainful activity amount. And they will pay me then the amount based upon how much I paid in. So I'll get a disability benefit from the Social Security based upon how much I paid in. And it could be a large number if I've worked for a lot of years and a smaller number, but I got it because I bought it. Next slide. Stay here for a minute. Let me finish this. And so if I get that disability, 2 years after I will get Medicare, right? So Medicare is a program for people on disability, also for people who are 65, and I got that Medicare program. Those 2 go together, right? Now, what about someone who has a disability who has no work record? Okay, they haven't paid into the system. Now we're going to go to the bottom 2 quadrants. SSI is a needs-based system. So in order to get SSI, which is currently $783 a month, not a lot, in January it goes up to $794 a month, but we have to jump through a lot of hoops to get that. So you'll notice this one says income and asset rules, right? So I don't have an entitlement. I'm going to go to the government. If I'm under 18, the person we're applying for is under 18, typically the rules are going to apply to mom and dad. So we're not going to cover those right now because that would be for someone who doesn't really have a job and has no assets. I'm going to assume that mom and dad has a job, perhaps one of them has a job, and they have some assets. They might have savings, they might have 401ks. So this benefit applies to when the individual with a disability turns 18. What happens? When they're 18, mom and dad's assets don't count, okay? Mom and dad's income doesn't count. When the person with a disability turns 18, We can apply on behalf of that person, or they can apply on their own behalf to get this benefit of that $783 a month in 2020, $794 a month in 2021. We have to be able to prove we have a disability, same as the other one. We have to still prove that disability, that because of my disability, even if I'm 18, still in special education, still in school, but I'm 18, could I go out and get a job making $13.20 a month? Okay, and that $13.20 a month goes up again next year by a small amount. I have to be able to prove with medical records, maybe IEPs from school, maybe I have a social worker that I'm working with, and sometimes we even have to have a vocational counselor work with that person and do a report. But we have to show with professional reports that I could not make, or my child could not make, that substantial gainful activity. Okay, so that's the income rule. We still have to follow that. But the second rule is, because it's needs-based, we have to make sure that the person who's applying for SSI doesn't have too many assets. And what are those? A house, they can have a house. They can have a car if they can drive. They can have a prepaid funeral. Okay, that might be some life insurance to cover that funeral. They can have $2,000 total. So that counts their savings accounts and their savings bonds and their checking accounts and any other account that they might own in their name, $2,000. They can also have an ABLE account, okay, which we're going to talk about a little bit. They can have an ABLE account, which is a new account that's been around for a couple of years, and it allows us to put so much away tax-free for a person with a disability. House, car, prepaid funeral, $2,000, ABLE account. Everything else counts in that $2,000. The savings bonds in the drawer, the cash value of life insurance that we bought for them, and now they turned 18, so maybe it belongs to them. And we find those kind of things. So once we prove that the person has a disability and they don't have too much money, they will become eligible for this SSI check. All right. They will ask us one more question. If the individual with the disability is a child that's living at home with us, they will ask us where our child lives. If we answer the question that the child lives at home with us, just like that, that's all we say, they won't get the full amount. They will get 2/3 of the benefit. Why? Because if they're living at home with you, you are providing in-kind income, and therefore they will reduce the benefit because the child has a source of income. It's income that they get to live free. So the other way to answer that question is they live in a separate household in my house, and they pay me room and board. When we answer it that way, they will have us fill some extra forms out, but your child gets the full amount. But when they get their benefit, they have to pay that room and board to you. Okay, a little complex, and we have lots of things on our website. And later on, if you want to go back and read those rules, or you can go onto the Social Security website and get that. Okay, so let's assume we do it all right, and they start getting their $783 a month. Right, first time they get a check, it might be a couple of months worth. You need to make sure as a parent you're taking your share of the expense out, because what don't we want to have happen? We don't want that account of your child's where the money's going into, maybe you have a payee account with you on it. We don't want that to get over how much? $2,000, because again, we don't want them to lose this benefit by having too much money. Okay, so as advocates for our child, we help them with this, and we have to make sure, and if it's us that's the person with a disability, and we're going to get this benefit, we have to make sure that we keep that account below $2,000. And we'll talk about some things we need to be thinking about. Along with SSI comes Medicaid. Now, if we're on a parent's health plan, which we might be able to do, maybe this Medicaid doesn't feel as important. So health coverage from a company goes first, and then Medicaid can kick in after that. Medicaid pays medical bills, but it's much more important because it does much more than that. It might pay for a job coach. It might pay for residential support. It might pay for all kinds of assisted living needs, all right? So Medicaid is a really important program. So health insurance, what happens is if on my parents' health insurance plan, usually I can stay until I'm 26 under the current Obamacare, correct? But in many states, the rules are that if you're on your parents' group health insurance plan and you have a disability, you can stay on that plan as long as the parents have it. So if the parents are going to work until they're 65 and the child's 35, they get to stay on the parents' health insurance plan. It is dependent upon the state that the company is domiciled in that you work for. So it's research as an advocate, as a parent, and you want your child to stay on your plan, you need to know what does my state say? Where is my company domiciled? And a lot of details, but go to your HR department and find out. Okay, and if your HR department says no, be an advocate and look a little further to make sure that you're following, that your child really can't be on your health plan. Okay, so that's how that works. Now I'm going to go through a couple more statuses. Next slide. Now I know I'm going through a lot of data, but I want to make sure that you get all the information you need. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but here's a Social Security record, mom and dad, that you should get for yourself, all right? So this tells us there's some numbers on it. It tells us how much I would get. It tells me, let's say it's my husband's record. It might tell me my husband's going to get a certain amount. And it also tells me in some places under survivors, how much a survivor can get. Survivor being a child with a disability, all right? Next slide. So I'm going to go through very quickly a couple of slides that show how this works. So when your child turns 18, they can get SSI. There's the $783 a month, and there's the Medicaid. Next slide. I can go through a series of things that occurs. The parents retire, dad retires. So what happens? When dad retires, the child is eligible to get some money on the parent's record. So they look at dad's record, he gets his. They look at mom's record, and she'll either get hers or half of dad's. And in this particular case, there was some money left over from the dad's amount, and the dad's amount is a family max. Now, in this case, the most they could pay this child on dad's record was $410 a month. So it's called DAC. When the child goes on the parents' records, it's a disabled adult child. When parents apply for Social Security, they will ask you the question, do you have a child with a disability? If you say yes, they will look into this, and your child will have to reapply for disability even if they were getting SSI. So in this case, the child was getting SSI. They moved into the Social Security file system, and they got 410. SSI is to bring you up to the 783. So they reduced the 783 by the amount, and therefore your child's still getting 783, but they're getting it from two buckets. Next slide. So why is that such a good thing that they got two checks? Because 2 years after they go into that bucket, they get Medicare, okay? Same as a senior. So now the child, my adult child, is getting SSI, they're getting SSDI or DAC, they're getting Medicare, and Medicaid is their supplement. Next slide. So the moral of this whole story I'm showing you is the child's still getting their benefits. Next slide. And they get to keep all these benefits, right? Very important, because what happens is, let's say dad passes away and while mom gets dad's, right? And child's amount goes up. Next slide. So when both parents pass away, it could look like this, that the child's getting $1,257 a month from the parents' record because they're gone, no more SSI, but they're getting Medicare and Medicaid. So do we really care about them having money anymore if they're getting this $1,257 on the top? Yes. Why? Medicaid. Medicaid is a ticket, okay? Medicare is important. It pays doctors, it pays hospitals, but it doesn't pay drugs. And Medicaid also pays supplements for healthcare. It does, but Medicaid pays the job coach. Medicaid pays residential supports. Medicaid, a lot of times you need to have Medicaid to get into the door of other programs. It is a critical pass. I call it the golden ticket. So we want to make sure that our child or ourselves stay eligible for that benefit. Next slide. Whew, we went through a lot. What do I want you to remember? I want you to remember that there's some dollar limitations that your child needs to have or you need to keep in place, that health insurance can go past the age of 26 on Obamacare if a person has a disability. I wanted you to know that as parents, you have Social Security and that your family member with a disability can get benefits greater than SSI on your record when you retire. So sometimes we retire sooner so that our child can get into Medicare, right? A lot of different nuances that can happen here. And finally, benefits change. Now, we are going into a whole new realm of a new presidential world. Things are going to change. I don't know what benefits are going to look like. We always don't know what they're going to look like. They change every year with amounts, but we know that they will change. So what do we have to do as the person who's helping someone else with benefits as a parent? We have to be an advocate and we have to watch those numbers. Next slide. Wow, that was a lot of stuff I threw at you, right? So how are you going to do that? Let's go to the next slide. How are we going to do this? Well, we have to do some legal things. And they're really important. It is hard when we are we just have typical children trying to plan for if something happens to us, what's going to happen next. Next slide. But how are we going to do this? And if we were just told because of benefits, our child can't have more than $2,000 in an ABLE account, what do we do? So why can't we just leave it to the other children, which is what my parents had done. When my parents had their wills done, they were providing for my sister who was on Medicaid and Social Security, right? Medicaid was really important. It was funding her residential support. It was paying for that. And my parents come from a family where they didn't have millions of dollars that they could have private paid that. So they left my sister's inheritance to me. There were 6 children and they split it 6 ways, but gave me 2/6. What's wrong with that? They knew they couldn't give her money, right? They knew she needed money. Over and above what the government paid for, she needed things. The government's not buying her clothes. They're not giving her any money for recreation. They're not going to make her life better. They're giving her basic support. So they left the money to me. What's wrong with that? Oh, lots of things, right? It's my money. Okay, I got to pay tax on it. I can do what I want. If I don't have to provide for her, it was not a legal obligation when they left it to me. It was a moral obligation. Okay, what if I'm sued? It's my money. It could be used up in court things, right? What if I was married and got divorced and I was holding it in tenancy with my husband and we got divorced? Half of it might go to him. What if I die? What if it goes to my children and they don't have the same intention to watch out for it? So leaving money to other children is not a solution. Next slide. But we're lucky that there's some planning that we can do if we have a child with a disability, or if we have the disability and our parents want to leave us money and we want to keep benefits. So what do? There's something called a third-party trust. It's a trust that allows us to receive an inheritance or have someone save for us. It is never under our control, which is why it works, okay? So parents, you set up this trust, you control it, you put the money in it when you die, and you name who is going to be the trustee and manage that money. So the money is in the trust. It is spent for the supplemental care over and above what the government is paying for, and it passes on to heirs, okay, if the child passes away. So in my case, I've set up a special needs trust for my son. It is going to sit there empty, probably. When I pass away, my inheritance to him will go into this trust. It'll be used for his lifetime. He'll keep his government benefits. And when he passes away, I have said who gets it. His brothers, charities, I get to say. So I, as the parent, control this. If I'm the person with a disability, I need to talk to my parents about making sure they don't leave me something and it goes to the special needs trust for me. But there's a trustee and it cannot be the person with a disability. Next slide. But this has got to be a part of the parents' documents. You got to talk to your attorney about, I want this special needs trust. Now it is not 2 pages. The law requires a lot of language in this. So when the attorney is doing it, they're creating a book about how this money can be spent and how it can be used and how it's not controlled by the person with a disability, which is why it works. Next slide. So a couple of things you should know. Who can set up the special needs trust, this third-party special needs trust? Anybody but the person with a disability. Who's in charge of it? You, if you're the parents, okay? If you're the person with a disability, you can never be in charge of this, okay? Parents, siblings, other people, corporate trustees can set this up. So who are all the players of this trust? The person who sets it up, they're called the grantor. The beneficiary, income beneficiary, that's the person who has the disability. And then the remainder beneficiaries are the people who will get it when the person with the disability passes away. The trustees are the people who are going to manage it. So I'm the trustee of my son's trust. When I pass away, it'll be my sister. And if my sister passes away, I name it a trust company. Next slide. Things you need to know. These are all important things to know. Usually an individual with a disability has one trust, okay? I wouldn't typically put two people in that. If I had two children with disabilities, I would usually have two separate trusts. And the trust is for supplemental care only. It is supposed to not pay basic support. Why? Because the government benefits pay basic support. Okay, that's how this works. The government benefits pay for whatever I can get there, and then whatever the government won't pay for, this trust will use. So we know the government's not going to pay 100%. Once in a while, parents tell me that, but it doesn't work that way, really. If somebody needs new clothes, if they need to they want to go on a vacation with their siblings, they need extraordinary medical support, that's where this trust is for. It needs to be irrevocable if there's money in it, and I don't want a trust that can never be changed, so it can be amendable to stay compliant with the law. So if you have one, open it up and read it. I know they're big documents, and make sure that it says it can't be used for basic support. Make sure you know who the trustees are. Make sure you know who's going to get it when your child passes away. And it should have language in it that it's irrevocable, and it also should have language in it that says it can be amended to stay compliant with the law, not for any reason, but to be compliant with the law. Why do we do that? Because in the future, this is a long trust. It's going to last a long time. It's not going to last just for a short period of time, right? It's going to last. Sometimes we have trusts that last until our child's 18 or 25. This is a trust that's going to last your child's lifetime, or your lifetime if you're the person with a disability. And if the law changes, we need it to be corrected. We need it to be corrected. Okay, so that's important. That's why we do that. Next. So when should you set it up? Sometimes people say to me, well, my child's 5. I can wait until they're 18 because that's when they're going to get government benefits. I would say it should be set up tomorrow. Why? Because no one has the time clock of when our clock is over. So since we don't know that, I need to make sure my trust is set up for my son because I can't create it when I'm gone. Next slide. There's a specific way we want it set up, not inside your will. Why? Why would I not put it inside of my will? Some attorneys say they're going to do that. Well, if I put something inside my will and say, when I die, create the trust, it won't exist until I die, right? And if it doesn't exist till then and the law doesn't allow us to do this anymore, I've lost the opportunity. So I don't want it inside my will. I want a document standalone. Next slide. Okay, so there's a couple of reasons I want it to be a standalone. One, I want it to follow the rules of today. If the attorney says to you, well, we'll just put it inside your will and it'll get created when you die. No, I want a separate document that's called the Mark Ellard Special Needs Trust. I want to sign it and I want to have it exist. I want it to follow the rules of the year that I'm signing it because the laws are good right now. I also want other people to be able to access it. So if I put in there that I have a trust for my son, I created it, my parents or his siblings could refer to that document. So if my son works at a job and he's not married and he has life insurance on his job, he wants to leave it for his brother. He can't leave it to his brother directly. He'll lose his benefits, but he can label the beneficiary of that life insurance to go to the special needs trust that I set up for my son. We call that piggybacking. Other people can piggyback on what I've done. Next slide. Okay, so we got a trust. Okay, we got the benefits so far. We've got a trust. How do we get money into the trust? Next slide. Let's talk about what we could do. One, so I got this trust, it's empty so far, right? So my will or my trust could say, put some money in there. I could refer to it, okay? I have life insurance on my life and I can make the beneficiary the trust. I have life insurance at work. I could change the beneficiary to be the trust. I actually put the beneficiary to say Mark Ellard Trust dated November 18, 2020, because that was the day I set it up, okay? My retirement accounts have beneficiaries on it. Now, if I leave the beneficiaries to say, I'm leaving it to my sons, I have 3. If I leave it to all 3, Matt, Mark, and Tim, they'll each get a third. But if Mark gets his third, he will lose his benefits. So it has to say Matt gets a third, Tim gets a third, and Mark's third goes to Mark's Special Needs Trust. Okay, that's how we fund it. Next slide. We could also start opening investment accounts. We could also we don't have to wait till we die to fund it. I could open an investment account and name it the Mark Special Needs Trust, invest in it. And so it's existing and it's growing while I'm alive, so I'm watching it grow. Now, there's a lot of technical things you want to pay attention to of who owns that trust and who's taxed on it, but you could do that, okay? Because I like to see that it's set up and working. Next slide. All right, so now we've got this trust. And what if you're sitting there going, oh, I already goofed up. I already set up an account in my child's name. Grandma just passed away and left my child money. There's another kind of special needs trust. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details, but it is called a first party trust or an over trust or a payback trust. I call it an oops trust. So you remember that if you made a mistake and there's money that's gotten to your child, there's another kind of trust you can go to an attorney and ask them to help you with, and it's called a first party trust. You will note on the next slide that this first party trust allows us to put the money in it, but then later on, you'll see the difference on the left side. As soon as my child passes away, it goes to the heirs. On the payback trust, when my son would pass away, the state gets reimbursed for Medicaid spent for him. So I get to use it. He gets benefits all of his lifetime, but when he passes away, the state can come back to this trust only and get reimbursed. So just keep that in mind that you might have to have that when there's a mistake. Next slide. Okay, that was the easy stuff. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go through some things here that will that we need to just think about. Okay, next slide. One hard decision. We talked about the money people, but when your child turns 18, something changes. You're still their parent. You're not their guardian. You're not their legal guardian. Next slide. So when they turn 18, I have to make the decision. Do I do nothing and let my child have all their rights? Do I have them sign a power of attorney? Do I have the capacity to do that and give somebody rights to help them with things? Or do I become their guardian? Do I actually become court and become the guardian and take care of their medical decisions and to take care of their money decisions? When they turn 18, that's a necessary thought process you have to go through. Can that person do that for themselves, or do we need to help them in some way? The other thing is, if you are their guardian, you would be putting something in your will to say, if something happens to me, this is the hardest part. If something were to happen to me, who is going to step into my shoes and become his guardian next? So in my will, I would be nominating people, okay? Just nominating them, because they would still have to go to court and take over the role, because this is, guardianship is a court process. Next slide. So I'm giving you all the different things that you need to be thinking about, because guardianship is a court proceeding. If you're the guardian, you have to report to the court annually. What you're doing is the court is assigning you this role, and you have to court once a year and report on how this person is doing, okay? So the biggest issue here is independence, and how independent can they be, or do they really need this oversight? Next slide. Okay, so we're going to quickly go through some of the tools that you should be thinking about and putting this planning in place, and then we're going to wrap up with a few little points, right? So next slide. Just to recall the pieces you need to put in place. First, you need a trust. Everybody needs, if you have a disability, you need this trust. If you're planning for your child, you need this trust on the left, the special needs trust. Now, if you have the disability, you can't create that yourself. Your parents have to do it for you, or somebody else has to do it for you. You can't create it, but you can create the one on the right, okay? If you have a disability and you have money that you shouldn't have and it's stopping you from getting benefits, you certainly can use the one on the right. Next slide. Next tool that we can use is the ABLE Act. We haven't talked a lot about that, and it's pretty complex, and we have lots of slides on our website if you want to really get the detail on them. We've done some with the actual ABLE groups, but the ABLE Act is some legislation that passed that allows us to save money for a person with special needs tax-free, or they can do for themselves. Next slide. So these are just some basic things that happen to be connected to the ABLE Act that you should know. One, it's an account that can be set up. It's tax-free savings. Yay, tax-free, that sounds good. It can be used for approved expenses. So I can set up an ABLE account for my son. I can put money into it. It could be used for needs that he has for special needs, but it's very broad, okay? A person can have an ABLE Act if they were diagnosed before the age of 26. Okay, that's one of the nuances of this legislation. And that person can have one account only, okay? They can't have two ABLE accounts, one ABLE account. The most you can put into an ABLE account right now is $15,000 a year, okay? So I could put in 10 and somebody else can put in 5 for my son. Nobody else could put any money once we get the 15 in. If my son works, he can also put in an additional $12,000, and that varies by state, but he could put an additional amount in because he works, right? And the max amount you can put in there is capped at the state level because it's like a 529. Next slide. Just some basics. So we talked about the basics. I'm going to go through a few limitations on the ABLE account. One, if the person has SSI, if their ABLE account has over 100,000, their SSI will be suspended. So if you have SSI, we can set these ABLE accounts up, but we want to keep them limited to under 100,000 if we don't want their SSI cut off. Okay. Now they just came around, so not many people. I don't think anybody has 100,000 in their account yet. They are state-run accounts, and so how they're set up is you go to the state and you find if your state has one, and if you can go to lots of websites that will educate you about that. But know that that $100,000 limit exists. Now, in Illinois, we can put 450,000 in our account, but if the person has SSI, I'm very careful. All right. Okay. The other thing about the ABLE you should know is there's a payback at death, right? So they allow us to do this, but when the person with the disability passes away and they've had Medicaid, Medicaid can claw back into that account for money that's been used. Now, should you, and it's only, they only claw back from the time the account was open. So if I open the account today, any Medicaid spent going forward for my son could get reimbursed upon his death. Now, federal government says they will claw back. Many states are not clawing back. So it's important to know where Medicaid is being funded from. Next slide. So a couple things have changed about the ABLE that I also want to make sure you know. One, the max that can go in is 15,000. If the gifting amount goes up, that might increase. You can roll 529s into an ABLE. It would count toward the 15,000. But if you set up a 529 college savings plan for your child and you realize they're not going to go to college, you can roll it to the ABLE and then they can become eligible for benefits. 529s usually don't work against your child because usually the parents own it, not the child. But sometimes we want to have it accessible because they're not going to go to school, and we can roll it to the ABLE and have it be used for special needs. There's a retirement savings credit that can be used that apply to ABLEs. In some states, there's also a tax credit that can be used. If you live in Illinois, for example, you can have a tax credit for making a contribution. So each state has their rules. And then finally, if the person works, this is a new thing that's basically happened, is if a person works, they can have the ABLE funded out of their own work pay too. Now, finally, there's one other thing that has recently changed, that Social Security will allow SSI checks to go directly into an ABLE. Sometimes that helps us when the person is working and they're getting SSI. Their SSI can even go directly to an ABLE. All right. Next slide. All right, one last thing I want to talk about. So if we did everything I've talked about, we got benefits, we did the Life Clear plan, we figured out how much we need, we're funding it, we're figuring out from our own financial plan, how do we have enough to take care of ourselves and then leave enough for this family member who might need some subsidies, right? And lead them into a special needs trust for them. We understand that we could set up an ABLE account, and we know that we need legal planning, special steps we have to do. So let's say that something happens to me, right? I'm the one who knows everything about how would I help my son, what I do on a daily basis, the things I need to do. Or if you're the person with a disability and somebody in your family is helping you and they have done all of these things for you and then they pass away. So they know how they help you. I know how I help my son. But if something happens to me, who's going to step in? Next slide. What are the things that we should be thinking about that we need to communicate? Because there's no, I don't think yet, some way to communicate from up there down to the people left on the planet, right? So if you think back in time, and so you think, well, everybody knows this, what I'm doing, don't they? Don't the siblings know? Doesn't everybody know? So we think about it that way, and we say, well, not really. If you think back the day your child was born, or the day you stepped into the world of disabilities yourself. What did you know? What did you know about the limitations of that $2,000 in an account? Or what did you know about how a special needs trust works? Or what did you know about how accessible housing works? Any of those things, right? So let's go forward, next slide, and think about the things that we might need to tell someone, right? What about residential? Where would this person live? If they're living with us, what's the next step? Or if they're living in some kind of supported housing, how's it working? Who's funding it? What's important about that housing that has to be modified for that person with a disability? We know it, we did it, we helped, we're thinking about it. Or if our child's youngster, we're thinking about this all the time. We've done the research. Don't think anybody else knows it. Next slide. If your child's young and they're in school, are you documenting the things about school that you need to know? And who else would know that if something happens to you, okay? The first time I went to an IEP, it was not a parent-teacher meeting, right? There's a lot of people in that class. Or if I have to fight the school to get my child not in remote learning right now, but to get the stuff they need, or if I need to, all those things that we do as parents, what does it take? We have that in our head and we know we're fighting the battles or we're advocating. How do we communicate that? Next slide. What about employment? You know, if the person can work, what do we have to know about ADA and what do we have to know about employment and what jobs the person can do and what can't do? Next slide. Just going to give you a few more pointers. Medical care. If you have a history of medical care that you need to document for your child or for yourself, what works and what doesn't? Document carefully, not just what you're on, not just the doctors you have, but the doctors you've already seen that you should never see again, and the medicines that you tried or the procedure that you tried that don't work, because someone else coming into the picture might not know all of that. Really important information to communicate. Next slide. Social life. So friendships, activities, all of that our family member may or may not be able to have access to if we're not around, and how do we make sure that continues, and how do other family members know about it? Next slide. And then finally, one really important one is routines. So we've changed our lives to make sure things work. We've changed things we do to make sure things work. And so we need to make sure that continues, right? Next slide. It's the little things. And if we aren't going to have some special powers when we pass away, we need to write it down. We've tried to think of everything we could. We create a little system where we put it down. I do for my son, every little thing I can think about, and I keep it updated. You know, I pick a day around his birthday that I say, what did I learn this year after I've done the initial book? How do I add new things in there about all the government benefits and about his life and about things that work and about things that don't work? Somebody has to get this information, because we can do everything right and we can leave the trust and we can leave money and we can get benefits. But if somebody is going to step into our shoes and help, don't make it hard on them. Pass along the information that they need to have. Next slide. So if you write it all down, you need to tell people where it is, okay? Share this stuff with your family. If you think that they aren't thinking about it, if they aren't thinking about, wow, I wonder if I'm going to get the job. I wonder what I'm supposed to do. This is a really good thing to do. Have a family meeting, talk about it to grandma and grandpa, talk about it to aunts and uncles, tell them what you're doing, tell them where things are at, tell them that you've left instructions behind. It's a really key point. Next slide. I know I went through a lot and we're going to wrap up. So there's a lot of information here on our website. If you want to go through that, on our main site, you'll see all kinds of other webinars that you might say, what did she say about that thing? Or what did she say about this? So free to access those. Are all complimentary. Next slide. So what do you do next? Remember I said in the beginning, I wanted you to learn one thing. Just take out a piece of paper right now. I know that if I come out of a class and they tell me 10 things to do, I'll go home and I'll not do any. And so I told you today that you need to get legal stuff done. You need to get money out of your family member's name. You need to write down the future. You need to do a plan, a life care plan, all these steps that we talked about that you need to think about. all I want you to do is take a piece of paper out right now, take a little piece of paper, there's a card that you can post on your refrigerator, and commit to yourself that what I heard today, I'm going to do one thing. If it's pulling out the trust that you already have and checking to see it's irrevocable, if it's checking out that savings bond in the drawer and you need to do something about it, if it's pulling out a piece of paper and starting to write a history, I don't care what it is for you, pick one thing and start. Okay, next slide. And we're wrapping up. I know we went through an awful lot in a very short period of time, but I hope you're able to learn some takeaway. So that, remember, our mission was to make sure that our family member, or if we're the person with a disability, we have a safe, fulfilling life. It's what we want for all of our children and all of our family members, right? So I encourage you to take the first step. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Hi, everyone. This is Sarah with QRSMA's Family Support Department. I just want to say thank you so much for all of that fantastic information. And if you have any questions, we do have this slide here for Marianne's contact information, and you can always reach out to us at familysupport@qrsma.org as well. So next up, we would like to introduce Monica Morales with Genentech, who is going to be sharing their presentation and introduction to Evrysdi. Thank you so much again, Marianne, and welcome, Monica.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for having me here today. And I also wanted to send a shout out to our Spanish-speaking community. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos. Next slide, please. So thank you for joining me today in our discussion about Evrysdi. My name is Monica Morales, and I'm a Partnership and Access Liaison, also known as a PAL. This picture that you see here is probably one of my favorite slides, and it's a picture of the entire PAL team across the country. And that's me on the far left in the white shirt. So each of us is a local main point of contact from Genentech, and we're here to support people living with SMA. Our focus is to teach you about Evrysdi, and we also work with the My SMA support team to help you throughout your treatment journey. It's important to highlight that PALs do not provide medical advice. Your healthcare provider should always be your main resource for any questions about your health or medical care. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So our discussion today will cover a brief overview of the clinical story behind Evrysdi, such as what it is, how it works, how it's being studied, and what those results look like. We'll also discuss how to take Evrysdi and the available support services that Genentech offers. If you have any additional questions or you'd like to learn more about Evrysdi after this presentation, feel free to reach out to a local PAL in your area. And at the end of the presentation, I'll go over on how to do that. So with any medication that you may be considering, safety is always an important topic to discuss. And so that's where we're going to start today. Next slide, please. Evrysdi is a prescription medicine used to treat spinal muscular atrophy in adults and children 2 months of age and older. It's not known if Evrysdi is safe and effective in children under 2 months of age. Before taking Evrysdi, tell your doctor if you have liver problems, are pregnant, or plan to become pregnant, or are breastfeeding or plan to breastfeed. Evrysdi may harm an unborn or breastfed baby. It may also affect a man's ability to have children. Tell your doctor about all the medicines that you are taking. These are not all the possible side effects of Evrysdi, so please refer to additional important safety information throughout this presentation. And you can also find our full prescribing information at evrysdi.com. So next we're going to talk about how Evrysdi works. Next slide, please. Okay. As many of you may know, SMA causes progressive muscle weakness and decreased motor function because of a shortage of an important protein called survival motor neuron protein, also known as SMN. In our clinical studies, Evrysdi increased and maintained levels of SMN protein. Within 4 weeks of starting Evrysdi, the median SMN protein levels more than doubled and were maintained throughout 12 months of studies across all SMA types. Now you might be asking yourself, who did we study and who did we include in these clinical trials? Next slide, please. So the Evrysdi clinical trial program includes over 450 people, including infants, children, and adults from ages 2 months to 60 years with type 1, type 2, or type 3 SMA. Efficacy has been studied in people from 2 months of age to 25 years old. So now let's dive a little bit further into some of our efficacy data. Next slide, please. Evrysdi received FDA approval on August 7th, 2020, based on the results from the first 12 months of 2 ongoing studies. Our first study is called Firefish, with infants 2 to 7 months old and with type 1 SMA. This is a 2-part study with a total of 62 infants. Part 1 included 21 infants, and it looked at a couple of things. It explored the recommended dose of Evrysdi, and it also measured the safety and effectiveness after being on treatment for 12 months. Part 2 of the study includes 41 infants and is measuring the safety and effectiveness of Evrysdi at the recommended dose. Our next study is called Sunfish for children and adults with type 2 or 3 SMA and includes 231 individuals from ages 2 to 25 years. This is also a 2-part study, and it's called a randomized placebo-controlled study. That's a mouthful, but what that means is that there were 2 groups. One group took Evrysdi, and the other group took a liquid that did not have active medicine in it. And this is also known as a placebo group. All the individuals in the study were randomly assigned to participate in each group. There were 128 people with type 2 SMA and 52 with type 3 SMA. Part 2 of our Sunfish study includes 180 people and measured the safety and effectiveness of Evrysdi at the recommended dose found in Part 1. I'd also like to mention too that we have a third supportive study called Jewelfish, and currently that's looking at the safety of Evrysdi for people with type 1, 2, or 3 SMA who were previously treated with other SMA medications. So now that we've talked a little bit about how the studies were set up, let's look at some of the results. Next slide, please. In Part 1 of our Firefish study, Evrysdi helped infants with type 1 SMA achieve a key motor milestone. After 12 months of treatment with Evrysdi, 41% of these infants were able to sit for at least 5 seconds without support. As many of you may know, untreated infants with type 1 SMA are not expected to sit without support. Next, we're going to talk about some of the other observations from the Firefish study. Next slide, please. Evrysdi helped infants survive without permanent breathing support. At 12 months, 90% of the infants in the study were alive and could breathe without permanent support. And at 23 months, 81% were alive and could breathe without permanent support. Now we're going to review the results in children and adults with type 2 and 3 SMA in the Sunfish study. Next slide, please. In Sunfish, children and adults treated with Evrysdi showed improved motor function versus those not taking Evrysdi. That change in motor function was measured over 12 months using a scale called the MFM32. And we can see those results in this graph right here. The people taking Evrysdi are the navy blue line at the top, and the people not taking Evrysdi are the gray line on the bottom. At the end of the 12 months, the average scores of those people taking Evrysdi increased by 1.36 points. The average scores of those not taking Evrysdi decreased by 0.19 points. So like we talked about at the beginning, safety is always an important topic to discuss. Next slide, please. So currently, Evrysdi is being studied in people from 2 months of age to 60 years of age with type 1, 2, or 3 SMA. The most common side effects in the infant group with type 1 SMA include fever, diarrhea, rash, lung infection, constipation, vomiting, and upper respiratory infections such as a runny nose, sneezing, sore throat, and cough. In children and adults with type 2 or 3 SMA, the most common side effects were fever, diarrhea, and rash. These aren't all the possible side effects, so when considering taking this medication, it's important to discuss with your doctor about the balance between the risks and the benefits. I also want to mention that no one stopped taking Evrysdi because of the side effects in the main clinical trials after 12 months of taking Evrysdi. Safety in people previously treated with other SMA medications is currently being studied. So now let's talk a little bit about how it's taken. Next slide, please. Evrysdi is the first and only medication to treat SMA with at-home dosing. It's a liquid treatment taken every day by mouth, or it can be given by feeding tube. It is delivered directly to your home, stored in your refrigerator, and you measure the dose by using the syringes that come with the medication. As many of you know, the treatment with SMA, it's a journey. And to help along this journey, Genentech offers a number of support services called My SMA Support. Next slide, please. As part of the My SMA Support team, the PALs are here to provide education and information about insurance and financial assistance. We also collaborate with a specialty pharmacy for your at-home delivery. During these times, we're able to meet with you and your family virtually on the platform of your choice. The PALs also have interpretive services through Language Line Solutions, which offers translations for over 240 languages and dialects. So I know that's a lot of information that we've covered in the last few slides. So before we end, I want to do just a quick recap. Next slide, please. Okay. So just a recap of what we discussed. Evrysdi is proven to make a difference in infant, children, and adults with SMA. It improved motor function scores in 2 main studies of infants, children, and adults. And it increased and maintained SMN protein levels in our clinical studies. The safety of Evrysdi is being studied in people 2 months of age to 60 years with type 1, 2, or 3 SMA. Evrysdi is the first and only oral treatment for SMA that is delivered to your door and taken at home. So speak with your healthcare provider about Evrysdi if this could be the right choice for you. And for more information, feel free to reach out to your local PAL. You can do this by going to evrysdi.com and selecting Get Local and Dedicated Education and Support. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of your Summit of Strength today. And muchísimas gracias por su atención. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Monica. And thank you again to both of our wonderful speakers for your time and presentations today. We appreciate everyone who's joined in on this webinar. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with a survey link, and we welcome any feedback that you have to share. We're also thankful for the incredible support from our sponsors again for making the Summit of Strength virtual webinar series possible. If there's anything that we can do, or if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to email us at familysupport@curesma.org. Have a great day, everyone.